I've lived in my quiet little neighborhood for almost 9 years, and during all that time, I've managed to avoid one particular thing like a disease, the homeowners association. Not because I'm a troublemaker, not because I hate rules, but because I'm allergic to stupidity wrapped in authority. And our HOA, it was exactly that. A perfect cocktail of nosy neighbors, power-hungry board members, and one woman who genuinely believed God had personally appointed her to manage trash bins and lawn heights. Her name was Denise, everyone else called her the queen of the HOA. I called her something else. The first time she knocked on my door, I knew it wasn't going to be a pleasant relationship. I opened the door to find her standing there holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. She didn't say hello, she didn't even introduce herself. She just pointed at my newly planted lemon tree. This is a violation. I stared at her, a violation of what? Existential peace. She didn't appreciate the humor. She cleared her throat and tightened her lips. Front yard fruit trees are not permitted, they attract wildlife. I like wildlife, I replied, leaning against my door frames. Well, she said, adjusting her glasses, the HOA does not. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just annoying, she was going to be a problem. And she was only getting started. Within a week, I received 2 more notices. One because my trash bins were visible for 10 minutes longer than the allowed time. The other because my grass was apparently 1/8 of an inch higher than regulation height. I didn't even know HOAs measured grass in eighths. I'm pretty sure even God doesn't go into that much detail. At first, I tried to ignore it. I'm generally patient and I don't like unnecessary drama. But 3 weeks later, I received a final notice taped to my front door in big bold letters. A failure to comply will result in fines. That was the moment I lost my patience. I walked to the next HOA meeting. The room was a mixture of retirees with too much time and middle-aged people who took HOA politics more seriously than actual government elections. Denise sat in the center like she was running a courtroom. I raised my hand, they didn't call on me, so I stood up anyway. Look, I said, I've been patient, I've tolerated these ridiculous violations, but I'm warning you now, stop harassing me. Denise smirked, sir, the rules are the rules, if you don't like them, you're free to move. Someone in the room actually clapped. I took a deep breath, I'm telling you politely, you don't want to push me. Denise leaned forward, tapping her pen like she was about to issue a sentence. Are you threatening the HOA board? I met her eyes, I'm giving you a chance to walk away before things get complicated. There was a tense silence, then Denise burst out laughing. Not giggling, not politely chuckling. Laughing like I had just told the best joke of her entire HOA career. A few board members joined her, one guy even wiped tears from his eyes. Oh, this is precious, Denise said. Who exactly do you think you are? I didn't answer, I simply walked out of the meeting. The door slammed behind me harder than I intended, but maybe it added to the effect. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that laugh, was going to change everything. Because the HOA had just crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. And they had absolutely no idea who I really was. I gave them a warning, they ignored it, they mocked it. But I knew something they didn't. They had just picked a fight with the one person they truly didn't want to mess with. For now, I tried to go back to my routine. A quiet evening, some music, and a cold drink on the porch. But that peace lasted exactly 3 days. On the morning of day 4, I walked outside to find something shocking taped to my mailbox. A violation notice. But not for my lawn, not for my trash bins, not even for my lemon tree. This one said, "You are being fined for aggressive behavior and threatening the HOA board." And underneath the statement was Denise's signature, sharp, confident, almost smug. That was it. That was the moment I decided they were about to learn exactly who they were messing with. And when they finally did, they went pale. I stood there staring at that violation notice like it was some kind of joke. Aggressive behavior, threatening the board. If anything, I had shown them more patience than any sane person should. But that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the smugness in that signature. I could practically hear Denise laughing again. That morning, instead of drinking my coffee on the porch like usual, I drank it inside. And I stared out the window like a man plotting a heist, because I already knew what needed to happen next. But the HOA didn't give me time to think. By noon, another letter showed up. This time, Denise had upgraded her tactic, certified mail. Now that's when you know someone in an HOA feels powerful. She probably felt like she was sending government orders. The letter said I had 7 days to pay a fine for threatening the board, or they would pursue escalated action. I leaned back in my chair and laughed, not because it was funny, but because they truly had no idea what they were pushing. The phone rang. It was my neighbor Tom, good guy, veteran, quiet, smokes too much, talks too little. Hey, he said, you got that letter too, didn't you? What do you mean too? I asked. They fined 3 of us, me, you, and the guy on the corner. They said we were undermining HOA authority. I blinked. What did you do? I asked why we couldn't have flags on our porches. I sighed, and the guy on the corner. He asked if they could put potholes on the next meeting agenda. I rubbed my forehead. So, simply existing is now a violation. Pretty much. That's when I realized something. This wasn't personal. Denise was on a power spree. She wanted the entire neighborhood to bow down and worship her clipboard. But my patience was already thin, and when I lose patience, I stop being friendly. I went to print something in my office. Before the printer even finished humming, there was a knock at my door. Loud, annoying, HOA-style knocking, the kind that says we have no social awareness. I opened the door. There stood the deputy HOA enforcer, a tall, thin man named Harold. He always looked like he was smelling something bad. He held a stack of papers. These are your updated violations, he announced proudly. Updated, I asked. I just got the other one an hour ago. Yes, he said, pushing up his glasses, and we have added 3 more. For what? He looked down at his clipboard. 1, your porch light is too bright. 2, your car is parked 1 inch over your driveway line. 3, your wind chimes exceed acceptable noise limits. My wind chimes, I repeated slowly. Yes, he said, they exceed the decibel standard. I stared at him. Harold, do you have a decibel meter? He hesitated. No, but Denise says she can hear them from 4 houses away. He handed me the papers and turned to Lev. And one more thing, he added. You are required to attend a mandatory disciplinary meeting next Thursday. That's when the corner of my mouth twitched. A mandatory disciplinary meeting. For a grown adult. In America. Because of wind chimes. I waited until Harold walked down the driveway and disappeared behind the hedge. Then I closed the door and sat on the stairs. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calculating. I hadn't wanted to pull rank. I hadn't wanted to use who I really was. For years, I lived quietly, peacefully. Most people had no idea what my actual job had been, what I had done, or who I had worked with. My neighborhood thought I was just a quiet guy who kept to himself. But Denise's HOA was about to find out the truth the hard way. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. A deep voice answered, haven't heard from you in a while, everything okay? Depends on your definition of okay, I said. What do you need? I need paperwork, I replied, official paperwork. The voice chuckled, are you finally filing that complaint you said you'd avoid forever? Oh, I'm filing something, I said, looking at the stack of HOA violations on my table, but not a complaint. What then? A request. There was a pause, you sure? They pushed me, I said, so yeah, I'm sure. The man exhaled, all right, I'll send what you need. I hung up the phone, and for the first time since the HOA had started this nonsense, I felt the tension drain out of me. Because I knew, once that paperwork arrived, the entire neighborhood would witness a shift. The disciplinary meeting they summoned me to. They were not ready for what I was about to bring into that room. They laughed at my warnings. But they wouldn't be laughing much longer. The next morning started like any other, quiet street, birds chirping, and the subtle sound of my neighbor's sprinkler system refusing to aim in the correct direction. But inside my house, a storm was brewing. Because at exactly 9:17 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to my driveway. Not a delivery truck. Not the mailman's. A black government SUV. My stomach didn't drop, I wasn't nervous, but I did smile a little because I knew exactly what that meant. They were on time, just like always. The driver stepped out and handed me a sealed envelope. No chit-chat, no smile, just a respectful nod. I thanked him, closed the door, and stared at the envelope. This wasn't ordinary mail. This was the sort of document that made people sit straighter, the sort of paperwork that turned smug HOA presidents into pale statues. But I didn't open it yet. I wanted the moment to simmer. Before I could even pour myself a drink, I heard something approaching my door. High heels. Click, 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 click. Only one woman in the neighborhood walked like she was patrolling a kingdom she never earned. Denise. She didn't even knock properly. She hammered the door like she was trying to evict me from my own house. I opened it just enough to meet her eyes. She forced a tight smile. Good morning, I see you received some mail. Her eyes scanned the black SUV that was still turning around. I get mail every day, I replied calmly. This seemed official, she said, tilting her head. And since we have an ongoing situation, I believe the HOA is entitled to know what. No, I cut in, you're entitled to know nothings. Her smile faded. Sir, if you think hiding things from the HOA will help your case. I don't have a case, I said. You do. She didn't like that answer one bit. Her face twitched like she'd been insulted. We'll see you at the disciplinary meeting Thursday, she snapped. Looking forward to it, I said and shut the door slowly. I could hear her still talking outside, probably to herself, probably complaining, probably adjusting that clipboard like it was a holy relic. But I didn't care because now I opened the envelopes. Inside were 2 documents. The first one made me nod, the second one made me laugh. The first document was a formal statement verifying my identity and my prior occupation, the type of document that didn't come from HR or an office manager. It came from someone far above that, someone who didn't sign papers unless absolutely necessary. The second document, it was a notice of federal compliance. I leaned back and exhaled. Well, this is going to be fun. I set the documents aside and let them sit on my table like ticking time bombs. I didn't need to wave them around. I just needed to bring them to that meeting. But the HOA wasn't done escalating. Around 4 p.m., while I was trimming the branches on my lemon tree, illegally, according to Denise, I saw 3 board members walking down the street, marching, in formation, like they were reenacting a scene from an off-brand military movie. They stopped at my driveway. The tallest one, a man named Stuart, called out, "We need to speak with you." I wiped my hands and walked over. "You here to measure my grass?" He ignored the joke. "We are conducting a neighborhood compliance check." "Of course you are," I said. He opened a folder. "We received reports that you threatened the HOA board with outside assistance." I raised an eyebrow. Outside assistance? What, like mercenaries, wizards, the Avengers? He did not appreciate the sarcasm. "This is serious," he snapped. "If you attempt to bring outside forces into HOA matters, we can file a restraining order." I smiled. "Go ahead." That made him pause. Denise would have screamed, but Stuart hesitated because even he could sense something was off. "You seem awfully calm," he said. "I am," I replied, "because I know something you don't." "What's that?" I took a slow breath, enjoying the moment. "Everything you're doing right now, every fine, every violation, every false accusation, it's being recorded." He swallowed. "Recorded by who?" "Let's just say," I replied, "the wrong people are paying attention." That rattled him. He closed his folder without saying a word and motioned to the other board members to follow. They walked away quickly, almost too quickly, glancing back at me like I was a live grenade. When they were gone, I couldn't help but laugh. They were scared. They didn't know why yet, but fear had officially entered the HOA board. And the funny part, I hadn't even shown them the documents. That would happen Thursday. And when it did, their faces would drain of color so fast that even the sun wouldn't be able to warm them back up. The HOA wanted a fight. They were about to get ones. Thursday arrived like a bad storm, overcast, humid, and filled with the tension that only comes from people who think they're untouchable. I dressed casually, jeans, button-down shirt, nothing fancy, but I carried something much heavier in my briefcase, the documents that would make Denise and her HOA board regret ever stepping onto my lawn. When I pulled up to the community center, I could already see the cluster of board members standing outside, whispering like kids caught stealing candy. Denise spotted me immediately. Her eyes narrowed, and I could swear I saw a flicker of panic in that meticulously applied eyeliner. I walked in slowly, giving her time to settle into her ego before crushing it. The room smelled like cheap coffee and bad decisions, mostly her. The HOA president lectured the board about maintaining order, and they all nodded like robots programmed to approve nonsense. I cleared my throat, silence fell, and not the polite kind. The kind that feels like a vacuum sucking out every ounce of confidence from a person. "Good afternoon," I said casually, as if we were just having a chat about the weather. "I see we're gathered to discuss violations." Denise straightened her posture, the clipboard in her hand trembling slightly. "Yes," she said, her voice sharp. "Your continued disregard for HOA rules has forced this disciplinary meeting." I smiled. "I see." I pulled my briefcase from under the table and set it down slowly. "I've brought some paperwork you might find enlightening." She raised an eyebrow. "Enlightening about what?" I opened the briefcase and laid the documents on the table like weapons. The first one had my credentials. The second, well, let's just say it was enough to make a grown woman question every decision she had ever made. Denise leaned forward, peering at the papers, but something told me she didn't really understand what she was looking at. Her smile faltered. Her confident posture wavered. And for the first time in my life, I watched the queen of the HOA look genuinely unsure. You caw," she started, stammering. This is." "Oh, it is," I said calmly. "All of it, and if you try to impose another fine or issue another threat, it won't just be the HOA facing consequences." I let that hang in the air. Silence stretched. I could hear the board members shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, glancing at one another like someone had just turned on a high-voltage fan. "Sir," Denise finally squeaked, her voice cracking, This is a neighborhood matter. We handle minor disputes, not." "Not what?" I asked. "Not people who know exactly what they're doing, not people who have handled situations far more serious than this." Her hands trembled as she gripped her clipboard. I could almost hear the mental gears turning, trying to figure out if she had just trapped herself in a situation way beyond her understanding. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "I gave a warning, you ignored it, you mocked it, you even laughed." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted around the room, probably searching for reinforcements that weren't coming. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said, voice low. "Oh, I know," I replied. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and you're about to learn something too." I slid the paperwork toward her, slowly, purposefully. The room went silent, except for the sound of her breathing. She picked up one sheet and her face changed color, pale, almost translucent. I knew that exact shade. People who were about to make mistakes realized too late that they were in over their heads. Her voice barely escaped a whisper. How did you?" "I warned you," I said softly, leaning forward. "And now you're going to respect the rules, my rules. Because until you understand what I've done, what I've faced, and who I've worked with, you have no authority here." The other board members shuffled. Their collective confidence had evaporated like morning mist. The entire room was frozen except for me, and I let them sit there a few more seconds, savoring the moment. Finally, Denise swallowed hard, lowered the paperwork, and muttered, This changes everything." I nodded. "It does. And if you attempt another violation, another fine, or any form of harassment, the next meeting won't be about lawn heights. It'll be about consequences you're not prepared for." Her face went from pale to white. Even the veteran board members looked like they were about to faint. I packed up my briefcase, stood and smirked. Meeting adjourned. As I walked out, I could hear Denise muttering to herself, probably something about never, ever, or how could this happen. The rest of the board members were silent, staring at the table like it had just revealed a hidden bomb. When I got to my car, I took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain and victory. The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but everything had changed. The HOA thought they could push me around, fine me for trivial nonsense, and laugh at my warnings. They were wrong. Very, very wrong. And this was just the beginning. After that Thursday meeting, I thought things might calm down. I was wrong. Oh, how wrong I was. By Monday morning, my mailbox was jammed with threats, fines, and even a printed guide titled How to Avoid Escalating HOA Conflicts. Someone had obviously spent hours designing it. I flipped through the pages. Step 1, smile and cooperate. Step 2, do not challenge board authority. Step 3, do not question the queen. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. I realized something important. They were terrified, but terrified people are also the most dangerous. And that's when I started my little experiment. I decided to push just a tiny bit, not too much, just enough to watch the panic set in. I walked over to my driveway with a small toolbox. Nothing fancy, just a wrench and a flashlight, but I acted like I was on a secret mission, because in a way I was. Denise saw me from across the street, her eyes narrowed, I waved casually. She froze, that tiny pause, less than a second, was priceless. The queen of the HOA, staring at me as if I had grown horns overnight. I went about my work slowly, carefully unscrewing the little bolt that held my mailbox to its post. I didn't damage it, not really, just loosened it enough that it wobbled like it had stage fright. By the time I was done, she had marched over, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cracking slightly. "Relax," I said, "just a little maintenance." Her eyes darted to the mailbox, she gasped. That is against HOA regulations, you can't." I cut her off. I checked, I'm technically allowed to tighten bolts. Loosen them, well, the rules don't exactly cover that scenario, so I think I'm safe. She stared at me like I had grown two heads. Then she muttered something under her breath, clearly looking for witnesses. The other board members, of course, were nowhere in sight. Later that day, I received an email from the HOA secretary. Subject line, "Immediate compliance required." The body read, "Please provide written assurances that all minor maintenance work on personal property will not interfere with HOA-defined property aesthetics or regulations. Failure to comply may result in further action." I smiled, this was getting fun. That evening, I hosted a small barbecue on my lawn. Nothing fancy, just burgers and some old friends. But I knew the HOA had spies, they always did. By dessert, I noticed Denise peeking through my curtains, her jaw tight, clipboard forgotten on the counter. I waved, she disappeared instantly, classic move. But the real fun came the next morning. I received a certified letter again. I opened it cautiously. It was from the HOA board president herself, but this time it wasn't full of threats, no fines, no petty rules, just 4 words that made me grin like a cat who stole the cream. "We demand your presence." Demand, not request. Demand, that, my friends, is when fear turns into desperation. The letter also included a new rule that I was apparently violating, breathing too loudly near my porch. I nearly dropped the envelope. That was it, they had officially lost their minds. And that's when I realized they didn't understand what they had started. They thought they were playing a game of fines and letters, but I had experience in a completely different league. I wasn't just a quiet neighbor. I wasn't just a man with a wrench and a barbecue grill. I was someone who could turn their own rules against them in ways they couldn't even imagine. Thursday's meeting was coming up again, and I had already planned exactly what I was going to do. They would see the real me, the me they had no idea existed. And when they did, they would wish they had never mocked my warnings. Because this wasn't just about fines anymore. This was about authority, their authority, and I was about to show them just how fragile it really was. Thursday arrived faster than I expected. I woke up early, not nervous, not anxious, but aware that the HOA board was about to experience something they couldn't prepare for. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the neighborhood wake up, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit their little kingdom. By 9 a.m., the board members began trickling into the community center. Denise arrived last, of course, looking as if she had spent the entire morning rehearsing the words she would use to assert authority. Her clipboard was polished, her notes meticulously written, and her confidence almost tangible. Almost. I walked in casually, carrying nothing more than my briefcase, but the weight inside was far greater than anything Denise could comprehend. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. Silence fell like a blanket over the room. Denise's smile was tight. You could almost see the panic building behind her perfectly applied eyeliner. "I trust you've received my documents," I continued. "The ones outlining who I am, what I've done, and the consequences of continued harassment." Her hand twitched as she reached for her notes. "Sir, we don't see how this affects anything here." I leaned forward, placing the briefcase on the table. "It affects everything, because until you understand what you're dealing with, you are playing a game with rules you can't possibly enforce." She blinked, I saw it in her eyes, the first crack in the armor of the queen of the HOA. I opened the briefcase slowly, letting the papers slide onto the table like a stack of invisible grenades. "This," I said, tapping the top sheet, "is verification of my prior position, my training, and my experience." Denise glanced down, her face blanching slightly, but she forced herself to speak. "Sir, those are documents from your past life. This is a neighborhood meeting." "Exactly," I said. "You thought this was a neighborhood dispute, But what you don't realize is that I've handled situations far more complicated, far more dangerous than petty fines or wind chime decibel levels. Her hands shook slightly. I could see her trying to convince herself this was some sort of bluff, but even the most practiced poker face can't hide panic entirely. I gave warnings, I continued. I gave you chances, you laughed, you mocked me, you imposed fines for trivial nonsense, and now you are about to learn what happens when someone ignores the wrong warning. The room went silent. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Stuart, the tall one, was sweating. Tom, the guy who used to take his role way too seriously, was suddenly quiet. Even the secretary, normally an untouchable buffer for Denise, looked pale. Sir, Denise said finally, her voice trembling, please understand we just enforce the rules, we don't. Rules are only as powerful as the people enforcing them, I interrupted. And right now, the people enforcing them don't know what they're dealing with. I picked up one of the documents and slid it toward her. Her hands froze inches from the paper. What is this? She asked, her voice tight. You'll see soon enough, I said calmly. But I assure you, it's more than enough to make anyone think twice about issuing another fine or a single violation notice. Her face went pale, not just a little pale, the kind of pale that comes from realizing the rules you rely on are meaningless against someone you underestimated. I leaned back in my chair. You see, I didn't want this. I tried to avoid conflict. But when you mocked my warnings, when you threatened me, when you fined me for things that don't matter, you crossed a line. Denise looked like she was about to faint. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and landed on the floor with a dull thud. The other board members scrambled to pick it up, as if holding onto it might somehow restore their confidence. I smiled, now you know, and the real question is, will you respect it or will you keep testing me? No one answered, no one dared. And that was when I knew the neighborhood would never see the HOA the same way again. Because the queen of the HOA, she had finally realized she wasn't in charge. And for the first time, the board understood they had underestimated the wrong person. The meeting wasn't over yet, but the tables had turned dramatically, completely. And the fun was just beginning. After the meeting, I thought things might settle down. I was wrong. Oh, how very wrong I was. The board spent the next 2 days in a state of complete disarray. Denise didn't speak to anyone, and when she did, her sentences were clipped awkward. Stuart avoided eye contact entirely. Even the secretary looked like she wanted to disappear into the carpet. And then it happened, the twist. It was Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch, enjoying the quiet victory when a car pulled up across the street. Not just any car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. Its presence made the neighborhood seem smaller, like everyone's secrets were about to be exposed. Denise stepped outside immediately. She saw the car, her eyes widened. She froze, then she clutched her clipboard to her chest like it was armor. I smirked, this was going to be good. The driver of the sedan stepped out, tall, authoritative, wearing a sharp suit and sunglasses. He walked directly toward my house, not Denise, not the board, me. I stood and greeted him casually. Morning, can I help you? He pulled out a badge and handed it to me. No words, just the cold, unmistakable emblem of federal authority. Denise gasped and then she realized. Oh my God, she whispered. Everything all right? I asked innocently, setting down my coffee. Her lips trembled, Yuka. I laughed softly. Oh, I can, and I did. I tried to warn you, but warnings are only useful if people listen. The man in the suit nodded at me and handed over a folder. Inside were records, clearances, and official documents, things no HOA president should ever see. Things that instantly explained why my calm demeanor, warnings, and threats had carried weight they couldn't comprehend. Denise's face went from pale to white, her knees almost buckled. The clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the ground with a loud thunk. Stuart and the other board members looked like they'd seen a ghost. I smiled at the scene like a cat watching dogs argue over an empty bowl. May I introduce myself? The man in the suit asked, voice steady and firm. I'm here to make sure that everything is handled appropriately and that no one is harassed or threatened unfairly. Denise opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like she wanted to call a million meetings, but suddenly words didn't matter. Her authority evaporated the instant she realized what she had been dealing with. I turned to the board. Remember those fines you issued for trivial things? I asked. The wind chimes, the trash cans, the grass height, you thought you were in control, you weren't even close. Stuart tried to speak, we didn't know. Exactly, I said, cutting him off. You didn't know, and that's the lesson here. Denise sank into the nearest chair, head in her hands. I had no idea, she whispered. I leaned back and smiled. No one does until it's too late. You mocked my warning, laughed at me, issued fines, and now you're staring at a reality that doesn't fit in your HOA rulebook. The man in the suit stepped forward. I will be overseeing this situation from here on. No further harassment or violations. Any attempt to intimidate will be considered a federal matter. That sentence hit like a hammer. Denise went rigid. Stuart looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. The secretary finally whispered a prayer under her breath. I closed my briefcase slowly. Consider this the official lesson. Respect boundaries, understand who you're dealing with, and maybe, just maybe, you'll survive the next neighborhood meeting without humiliation. Denise dared a weak protest. We have bylaws, rules, authority. Yes, I said softly, you have rules. But rules only work if the enforcer doesn't completely misjudge the other side, and you did. For the first time, the HOA board realized that their neighborhood hierarchy, their petty power, their imagined supremacy, it all meant nothing against someone who could operate outside their narrow little world. And as I walked out of the room, I heard Denise muttering under her breath. I never thought. Exactly, that's the sound of a kingdom collapsing from within. The twist wasn't just that I could outmaneuver them. The twist was that they had no idea who they were challenging in the first place. And from that day forward, every violation notice, every complaint, every attempt at petty intimidation was met with something they couldn't control, couldn't ignore, and couldn't erase. They went pale and they stayed pale. The week after the federal visit felt surreal. The neighborhood was quiet, almost suspiciously so. I walked down the street, waved at neighbors, and noticed the difference immediately. Even the loudest complainers weren't muttering about my lawn or my lemon tree. Denise, she had retreated completely. She didn't attend meetings, didn't make calls, didn't even glance at my house when she drove by. I imagine she spent her time rereading every rule, every bylaw, trying to figure out how she had been outplayed without ever realizing the stakes. Stuart and the other board members walked around like children caught sneaking cookies. Their confidence had evaporated, and for once I could walk down the street without pretending to be polite. They knew, and everyone knew, that I wasn't someone to test. I even received a friendly wave from Tom, my veteran neighbor who always smoked too much and spoke too little. He leaned over and whispered, "Never thought I'd see the HOA brought to its knees like this. Nicely done." I smiled. Patience, observation, and knowing your limits, I said. You'd be surprised how effective it can be. The next HOA meeting was predictably uneventful. Denise didn't attend. Stuart muttered something about minor procedural adjustments, and the secretary filed paperwork like nothing had happened. But the entire tone of the room had shifted. Nobody dared to issue fines for wind chimes or grass height anymore. I sat quietly sipping coffee, pretending to take notes. But in my mind, I replayed the entire sequence of events. The first laugh, the ignored warnings, the certified letters, and finally, the federal paperwork that had turned their confidence into fear. It was almost poetic. By the end of the meeting, I realized something important. Victory wasn't about humiliation, fines, or power. It was about respect. And after weeks of petty battles and escalating nonsense, the HOA had finally learned a lesson they couldn't forget. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow exhale. I could feel the tension lift from the rooms like air finally escaping a balloon. The HOA thought they were untouchable. They thought I was just another neighbor. They were wrong. As I left the community center, I noticed a few board members glancing at me nervously. One of them muttered, don't push it," and then quickly turned away. I smiled to myself. I hadn't pushed anything yet. I just reminded them that some battles aren't fought with rules, they're fought with experience, patience, and knowing exactly who you are. Back home, I walked through my yard, inspecting the lemon tree. It was perfect. The wind chimes still swayed gently in the morning breeze. My trash cans sat obediently in their proper place. Everything looked ordinary, but nothing was ordinary anymore. The HOA had been reminded that not all neighbors play by the same rules. And there was something else, something subtle but profound. The neighborhood began to change. People started standing up for themselves, quietly but firmly. Small acts of resistance, small acts of independence. I didn't have to lead it. All I had done was remind everyone that authority, especially petty authority, is fragile when met with someone who knows exactly what they're capable of. As the sun set over the quiet street, I took a sip of coffee and smiled. I had one not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been harassed by trivial rules, ridiculous fines, or overzealous leaders. The HOA had been humbled, and more importantly, they had learned that some people can't be intimidated. Denise never returned to her throne of power. Stuart and the board adapted slowly, nervously. And me? I returned to my life, quiet but vigilant, enjoying my freedom, my trees, and the occasional wind chime. The neighborhood would remember this story for years. The one about the quiet neighbor who didn't threaten anyone at first, the one who warned them politely, the one who had patience and the right background and the right timing. And when they finally understood who I really was, they went pale. And they stayed that way. The HOA learned their lesson the hard way. And as for me, I went back to living my quiet, peaceful life with just enough chaos sprinkled in to remind them that true authority isn't measured by bylaws. It's measured by respect. And some people, they just don't know when to laugh at a warning. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.